After spending time with Assassin's Creed Shadows to reacquaint myself with its parkour and controls ahead of the release of Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag Resynced, I decided to revisit the game that became the turning point for the franchise's modern parkour system. The game that earned the label Back to Roots, Assassin's Creed Mirage. I remember when the game was released in 2023. By that point, I had already moved on from the franchise. It wasn't because of the stories or even the RPG direction itself, but because the complex parkour system of the classic titles were no longer there. The focus seemed to shift toward other gameplay elements such as combat and larger open worlds. Gone were the days of dense urban environments from Venice, Florence, or even Paris. However, that changed when AC Mirage was announced. From the beginning, the team at Ubisoft Bordeaux emphasized that Mirage was meant to honor the roots of classic Assassin's Creed. The focus would return to parkour and urban traversal. That immediately caught my attention, and I ended up purchasing the game shortly after release. Since then, AC Mirage has become my favorite Assassin's Creed title from the RPG era. It's important to acknowledge that Mirage did not bring back the classic parkour system. Instead, Ubisoft Bordeaux took the existing RPG era movement system and refined it to be as responsive as possible within the dense streets of Baghdad. It isn't perfect, but I genuinely admire the effort and dedication the team showed despite working with fewer resources than the larger Assassin's Creed titles. Their work helped to transform the system into what has effectively become the blueprint for newer entries in the franchise. Because I played Mirage from launch, I was able to witness the game's continued evolution through its updates. Even more than a year after release, leading up to its final update and the Valley of Memories DLC, the game continued to improve. One of the most significant additions was the control overhaul, which in my opinion benefited parkour more than anything else. I can only imagine the level of technical challenge required to make the RPG parkour system feel as responsive as it does today. I also want to acknowledge the role of the community. Throughout Mirage's lifespan, players consistently provided feedback about movement and parkour. Their constructive criticism, without a doubt, played a role in helping shape the improvements we eventually received. Focusing specifically on Mirage's parkour, I can honestly say it feels every bit as smooth as I remembered. It took me a little time to readjust to the controls, but before long I was navigating the city with ease. The experience was a stark contrast to Shadows. In Mirage, I didn't need to search for designated quote-unquote parkour areas. The entire city was built around traversal. Even though Basim lacks some of the flashy animations and movement options that now it has in Shadows, it ultimately doesn't matter because the environment itself encourages and supports free movement. The city constantly invites a player to engage with the parkour system. Of course, the system isn't perfect. The updates gave players significantly more freedom, but there are still moments where unexpected results can occur. Sometimes, Basim can practically launch himself from one rooftop to another in ways that feel unintended. There are also situations where the height and distance of a jump vary depending on the object being targeted, creating some inconsistencies with parkour. At times, it's difficult to predict exactly how a jump will behave. That said, these issues are relatively minor and far from game breaking. Considering the project's more limited scope and resources compared to larger Assassin's Creed releases, the amount of freedom Mirage provides is genuinely impressive. Mirage may not have represented a true return to the roots in the sense of bringing back the classic movement system, at least in my view. However, it absolutely marked what I like to call the parkour renaissance of the franchise. With all that in mind, I believe Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag Resynced has the perfect foundation to build upon what we have seen in recent entries. This isn't to say that the parkour showcased so far has looked bad. Quite the opposite. However, I do think there's still room for improvement, particularly when it comes to responsiveness and character control during traversal. Once the game releases and I've had the opportunity to thoroughly test it myself, I'll be diving much deeper into these topics. For now, my goal has simply been to revisit and share my experience with the recent games that helped revitalize parkour within the franchise. If I had to summarize Mirage's parkour in a few words, they would be responsiveness, speed, freedom, and precision. Even after the release of newer titles, Mirage continues to stand out thanks to its map design and refined movement system. If I could take elements from both Mirage and Shadows and combine them into Resynced, I would take Mirage's responsiveness and updated control scheme and use it with Shadow's polished animations and Unity-inspired side jump. Overall, I'm excited to play Resynced and experience Edward's story once again, now with modern visuals and updated technology, of course. There's one particular scene I'm especially interested in seeing. I won't spoil which scene I'm referring to just yet, but I'll definitely talk about it once I experienced it for myself. And with that, this concludes my recap of the recent titles. The purpose of these videos was never to perform an exhaustive analysis of the previous games. Instead, it was to develop a broader understanding of what to expect from Resynced so that I can evaluate its parkour system with the understanding that it will not feature the original Assassin's Creed 4 movement system.